Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for making it to today's webinar. My name is Elena Balestra, and I'm Membership and Capacity Building Manager at the European Patients Forum. This is actually the first webinar of our digital health webinar series. We are organizing this series of webinars, each tackling a different aspect of digital health. This is especially for you, our members, and the members of our members, with the aim of sharing information and preparing you to engage in our EU-level activities around this topic. And this first webinar will be an introductory one. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to share with you a few housekeeping rules and a way for you to better enjoy this webinar and be able to fully use the tool that we're using, which is GoToWebinar. Few ways. So you can, if you see a big panel with all the information of attendees and so on, you can decide to minimize it, like clicking on the orange arrow on the left side of the screen. So you can minimize it and leave it aside, being able to see fully the presentation. Should you have any questions, we hope this webinar to be very interactive. We will dedicate part of this webinar to a presentation for you to get better understanding of the topic, but then we will leave you the floor. So absolutely, we would like you to ask questions and share insights if you have. You have two ways of doing that. You can either raise your hand, so asking the floor, which we will give you, so make sure to have a microphone at hand and be able to speak with your audio and microphone on. Or you can decide also to leave your comments, to use the chat box if you would like to type down your question. We see normally we can see your name, but we can't see the organization you're coming from. So if you want to specify also the organization you're coming from while you ask the question, you can definitely do that. We will appreciate. This webinar will be recorded for your benefit, because it will also go on our YouTube channel, so you will be able to rewatch it and share it. And we will send you a follow-up with the presentation that you will see in a moment. If there are any people that have difficulties in following the presentation on screen and would like to receive the PDF format to use, for example, like a reader, please let us know. Let me know in the chat box, and I'll be able to send you the presentation during the webinar to allow you to follow better. I think those are the minimum housekeeping rules. Make sure your the battery of your computer is plugged in, so you don't have to run to find it and lose us in the middle of the webinar, or maybe in the middle of the time you were asking a question. And I think we're all set to move on and introduce you to our speaker. We have one speaker for today's webinar. I'm really happy to introduce her, and she was so kind to accept and fit our webinar in her very busy schedule. Her name is Anka Petre. She's the co-founder and CEO of the 2033 Consulting, which is a Paris-based firm, which is specialized in patient-driven health tech. The company provides healthcare organization with the tools to fill unmet patients' needs with impactful digital tools. So we ask Anka to have almost the impossible task to present and introduce to me, first of all, but also to our audience in a very simple way. What is digital health? What is really, how can we define it? And how can we explain it in simple terms? And what is really what's in it for patients, and what is the future we're looking at? So we will try to answer those questions. She will try to answer those questions in her presentation. And obviously, as I said before, we will take all the questions later on after the presentation. But if you please feel free to write them down as you feel popping them in your head in the chat box or in the question box. Anka, thank you very much for being with us today, and I'll give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much for having me today. I'm really excited to give this presentation because it really reflects the way that we think at 23 Consulting. So thank you for this opportunity. Without further ado, I want to dig right into the topic and talk to you about something that you are most probably familiar with, and that is the internet. And you all know that you can find a lot of things on the internet, but you can mostly find pictures of cats on the internet. This is the #1 search users look for when they search the internet. But joke aside, you can always also find more interesting things and more useful things in healthcare when you search the internet. For instance, you can search your symptoms and try to figure out what it is that you have. And I've done this experiment this week. I've typed in headache and fatigue, and this is the first result that appeared in my Google search. When I looked at all the different possibilities, the 16 possibilities for headache and fatigue, I realized that it could be anything from, a simple hangover to a serious disease such as lupus. And if you don't have any medical training, this can create a lot of anxiety because, a simple headache because you didn't drink enough water could turn, because of Dr. Google, into a serious disease. So basically, what you quickly realize is that when it comes to healthcare, the internet is pretty much filled with junk. Except this is not always the case. It is certainly filled with junk at a first glance, but if you look at it further, you realize that you can find a lot of very interesting resources. And I like to compare searching the web to searching for an apartment. You do a couple of first visits that don't end up being what exactly you're looking for, but it helps you improve your research criteria. And after a couple of visits of apartments, you end up finding that apartment that you were dreaming of, and you find the perfect result. And it's a bit the same with the internet. You need to have a bit of experience to know where to look for the information and how to navigate all this junk. But at the end of the day, you can find a lot of powerful resources. And one of the resources that you can find on the internet is the patient itself. In other words, you can find communities of patients. Because when we talk about the internet, the most underused resource that we have today is the patient. And how do we grab this resource? How do we use this resource? Well, I believe that technology, and internet being one of them, is key to empower the patient and to use this resource that is the patient. And I'll give you a couple of examples today of how technology is empowering the patient in healthcare. The first thing that I want to highlight is that with technology, the patient is not merely just a user of the internet. The patient becomes something that we call the e-patient. And you're probably guessing what the E stands for. The E usually stands for electronic, as in a lot of different examples that we have. And indeed, e-patients mean that patients know how to use electronic devices, know how to collect data, know how to navigate the web. But this is not all e-patient stand for. The E also stands for empowered, because when you have access to all the resources out there online, you are also empowered to make more thought through decisions. You're also empowered to be more active in your health journey. And this is also what E stands for. It stands for engaged, because you're not just, feeling something and asking your doctor what it is. You feel something and you go look for the information. You become very active in your healthcare. But surfing the web is not enough. And an e-patient is also someone that is equipped. And equipped with what, you would ask? It can be anything from voice assistants to wearables to all sorts of trackers and mobile apps that can give you more information about your health and help you make more informed decisions. And so at the end, an e-patient, because of all this, becomes an expert of his own health. One of the greatest examples of an e-patient is e-patient Dave. E-patient Dave is the name that this gentleman uses on the internet to talk about his disease. He was diagnosed in 2007 with a stage 4 kidney cancer. As some of you may know, a stage 4 cancer is the most advanced stage, and he basically, the cancer basically spread to all his body. So he had in his lung, he had in his bones, I believe he had in his skull, and so on. And doctors told him, if I'm not mistaken, that he was dying and he only had 20 or so weeks to live. Of course, when you feel fine and someone tells you that you only have 24 weeks left, it can be a major shock, and it can be something very hard to deal with. So doctors advised patient Dave to look for online communities of patients that go through the same thing, and perhaps he could find support in those communities. And this is exactly what he did. He went to an online community and he started talking and engaging with other patients. Eventually, he heard about a treatment that he talked about to his doctor, because that treatment, he never got that treatment before, and he thought, you know, if there's something out there that could help me, why not take it to my doctor and see what he thinks? And it turns out that that treatment was extremely helpful, and e-patient Dave is still alive today in 2020. So it's an incredible story of how when patients become e-patients in all what it means, they can also have a great impact on their own health and collaborate with their medical team for better outcomes. Another example of this is the We Are Not Waiting community, which is made of diabetic patients that had enough or of not having the proper medical devices to treat their diabetes, and decided to create the perfect device on their own to hack healthcare. To give you a bit of context into diabetes, you probably know that patients suffering from diabetes have to continually monitor their blood sugar through this finger stick test, and once they have the measure, they have to adjust the insulin levels. One way of doing this is what you see here, is through an insulin pump and a continuous glucose monitor. The glucose monitor reads the blood sugar, and every 5 minutes, it provides the patient with the measure. So the patient, once it has the measure, it can adjust the insulin that is administered by the insulin pump. The problem is, when you have data every 5 minutes, it can become incredibly overwhelming and very difficult to always be ready to adjust the insulin and always be able to read and react to the measure. So patients thought that there has to be a better way to manage this. And the We Are Not Waiting community turned its attention to what we call closed loop systems, where the glucose monitor and the pump, they communicate with one another, meaning that the glucose monitor sends the information straight to the insulin pump, so the patient doesn't have to do anything anymore, and the insulin pump automatically adjusts the insulin levels depending on that measure. The first time they implemented this system, you can imagine that it was a bit, homemade. So it didn't have the proper cybersecurity measures. It didn't follow any type of regulation. So, it was very difficult to scale to other patients with such a device. But because of this, proper medical device companies decided to actually produce this device, this communicating device, and create what we know today as artificial pancreas, which is exactly the device that I've described. So because of the input from the patients and their ability to hack healthcare, proper pharma companies and medical device companies decided to produce this device. And this leads me to talk about digital therapeutics. Digital therapeutics are, as their name shows, digital solutions that deliver care to the patient in two different ways, either as a substitute to drug therapy or in addition to a therapy. The important thing about digital therapeutics is that they are very different from all the digital health gadgets that we have out there. And how is it different? They are evidence-based software or hardware, meaning that they require clinical evidence, which you get from clinical testing, in order to be approved by regulatory authorities such as the FDA or the EMA in Europe before being released into the market. So it's exactly the same as any other type of medical device or any drug. It needs clinical proof to ensure it's safe and that it has an actual effect on the patient. So let me give you a couple of examples of digital therapies, just so you can have an overview of what's out there.
All right, recruit, suit up.
As you make your way into the next world.
So this is an example of a game. It's a digital therapeutic based on a game that was the first game-based therapy approved by the FDA. And this is designed for kids suffering from attention deficit disorder. And it's part of a therapeutic program, meaning that it doesn't just work by itself. It needs to be in addition to a drug and visit to the doctor. But it's a great example of what we call digital therapeutics. It's not just an app that you have on your phone that helps you. It can be something just like what you've seen. It can be a proper game that kids can use. Another example of a digital therapy that's perhaps more conventional is MoveCare. MoveCare is a survey that you can find online and that you can fill on your mobile device, on your computer or your tablet. And it's designed for lung cancer patients, and they need to fill this survey every week. The algorithm behind this app analyzes the data, and if they see any abnormalities or any indication that the health level of the patient is deteriorating, they automatically send an alarm to the doctor. So doctors can pretty much spot a relapse way faster than if they had to wait for the patient to come in for a visit. And in fact, when you look at the results from their study, you realize that in patients who used this app, the overall survival went up by 7 months. 7 months is a lot of time, and it's pretty incredible, at least in my opinion, to see that something as simple as a survey with an alarm to your physician can help you live 7 months longer. And this is the example of what we call a digital therapy. Now, one of the problems we have with digital therapies is that they require you to interact with a digital device. You can use your keyboard or your mouse or your trackpad or even your fingers swiping through your screen. So it does require you to learn some, basic but skills to interact with these surveys. What if you could use something else, something that I'm using right now, which is my voice? Wouldn't it be nice in the morning when you wake up and your voice assistant knows that you suffer from, let's say, a chronic disease or something like that? You could say, oh, hello, good morning. How's your pain level today? If you can rate it between 1 and 10, where would you stand? And this is the type of interaction you can have with your voice assistant There are multiple voice assistants on the market, and it's just more human, at least human-like, and it doesn't require you to make any effort. It's the care that comes to you instead of you having to do anything to reach that care. And if you think about it, this could also be interesting, because imagine you're at home with someone from your family, and that person has a heart attack and collapses in front of you. If you don't have any type of medical training, I mean, it's pretty overwhelming and hard to know what exactly it is that you have to do. And we all know that these first minutes after someone collapses are extremely important to see what the outcomes will be after. So imagine that person collapses, and the only thing you have to do is say, hey, what should I do? My grandfather, for instance, just collapsed. And then your voice assistant tells you exactly what it is that you have to do and calls an ambulance for you. This is a type of interaction that you can have. And if you think about it, what's interesting is that you don't have to seek assistance, go to the hospital, go to see a doctor for all this to happen. In fact, all this comes to you and you become the point of care. And this is what's really interesting when we talk about digital, is that it completely shifts the way that we see healthcare today. Today, if we want healthcare, chances are we have to go see a doctor. But there's really little we can do just from our homes. Or is it? What is it that we can do today exactly to become the point of care? Let me give you a couple of examples. The first thing is gene sequencing. Now, there's a lot of controversy around gene sequencing simply because when you know so much about yourself and your genome, you also know if you have a predisposition for a serious disease, and that can be, very overwhelming. So I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing. I don't want to judge gene sequencing. I'm just saying that it's out there and that it can provide you a lot of information about your health level. And also another thing that you have, it's a microbiome test where they take a sample of your microbiome that's in your gut and they analyze it to see what type of bacteria you have. Depending on that, they can send you recommendations to adapt your diet and also adapt, for instance, the probiotics that you can take to improve your microbiome. This is not based on the digital technologies that I've shown you so far, but this last one is. These are trackers or wearables or Internet of Things, as they call it. It can be a connected watch that you have on your wrist, but it can also be a sleep tracker that you can put on your head at night that can track your sleep and improve the quality of your sleep. So there are a lot of things that you can do today to improve your health just from sitting on your couch and using these devices. You don't need to go anywhere. You don't need to go to a hospital or see any doctor. Those are things that you can do yourself to improve your health. But then this raises another question. What happens to my data? Because as you can see, a lot of this e-patient movement, it's based on the fact that you have data, you use data, but of course, other companies also have your data. And I wanted to tell you a story, in fact, a story about diapers that will show you how incredibly sensitive your health data is today and how it runs free within databases from other companies that you don't even know about. This story happens in the US, and as you probably know, I mean, everywhere in the world, it's extremely, extremely hard to change the habits of retail customers. You and I probably have always bought the same, toilet paper brand and same yogurt brand, and we always keep on purchasing the same products. And this is true for pretty much everyone on this planet. So when you are purchasing a product from one company, it's incredibly difficult to change your habits, except at one particular moment in your life, and that is when you have a kid. Because for the first time ever in your life, you will have to buy diapers. And companies know this very well, that this is a key moment where they can gain new customers. The problem is that birth registries are usually public in most countries. So all the companies have the same information at the same time, and all of them send these coupons and catalogs to new parents at the same time. So American company Target decided to do things differently. They wanted to target expecting mothers as soon as their second trimester by looking at their purchase patterns. For instance, expecting mothers would buy things like maternity clothes or prenatal vitamins. And they've implemented this system, and they had it running for over a year. One day, this man came into one of the Target stores in Minneapolis, asking to see the manager. He was screaming that his teenage daughter received coupons and catalogs for maternity, and he thought it was completely inappropriate for a brand to send this type of material to a young lady, and the father thought that Target was encouraging his daughter to get pregnant and have an active sexual life. So he was very, very furious. Of course, the manager apologized, and after a while, he decided to call the father again and re-apologize. The problem is, when he called the father for the second time, the father sounded somewhat embarrassed. And actually, he told the manager that some things had been happening in his house, and in fact, his daughter was due in August. So the store was right. That young lady was indeed pregnant, and the store knew about her pregnancy way before the parents. And when I read this story in the New York Times, it had me thinking, if they know when I'm pregnant, chances are they would probably know before my parents, maybe even before my doctors. And it's really scary to see that all these big companies out there have a lot of information about your health when you yourself and your medical community don't have access to that information. And that brings me to another technology that I wanted to highlight today, that is blockchain. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of what blockchain is. I just wanted to say that for a very long time, patients had been wanting to have their data back and have some kind of control and visibility over how these companies are using their health data. And that's perfectly normal. The problem is that for a very long time as well, they had absolutely no technical way of controlling the data and making sure that companies are transparent over the way that they use the data. There simply was no technical solution out there until blockchain came. And today, blockchain is the only solution out there that can help patients have more control over their data and companies be more transparent about the way that this data is used. Now, I don't want to finish my presentation on this very scary note about the security of our data. I wanted to talk to you to conclude about something that's going to happen in the future, and we might think it's the very far future, but actually it's already happening today. What if the patient could become digital instead of human? And I don't mean e-patient. I mean patient that's not made of flesh and bones, but it's made of zeros and ones. This is what we call a digital twin. A digital twin is something like this. Whoop. I'm not sure the thing started. There we go. This is the digital twin of a heart. This is a perfect replica of a real heart and very specific to the patient which it was inspired from. And this was made to help physicians understand how that particular patient heart works in order to improve care. But if you think about it, why stop at the heart? Why not have the whole human body as a digital twin? How incredible would that be if pharmaceutical companies could test a drug on your digital twin before giving it to you to make sure that that specific drug is designed for you and that your effect was tested on your digital twin before it was given to you? Or imagine if your surgeon could train on your digital twin before operating on you. That would be completely revolutionary in the way that we think about healthcare. And it would be a first and perhaps a big step into personalized medicine. So this is what the future of healthcare looks like. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anka, for your time and for your presentation. For some questions from the audience. I'm sure there are many. I remind you that you can interact with us in two different ways, either raising your hand or asking a question. Yeah, someone is thanking you, Anka, for your presentation, saying this was excellent. And we had a question during the presentation from Julio Burman from Israel that is asking, he was curious to know a little bit more about the e-patient David. He was saying that it might be that he didn't get proper information from his doctor.
Right. So if I understand the question correctly, perhaps he didn't get the correct information from his doctor.
Yes.
Right. Yes, that could be. And I think this is exactly the point of the e-patient movement, is to say, you know, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of studies each year about medicine. And for a doctor, it is incredibly hard to be aware of everything. So, you know, if I'm not mistaken, I think doctors, there are, you know, just a couple of drugs that they prescribe over and over and over again. They don't have all the knowledge at their disposal, and this is one of the limits. So when you are a patient, it's also your responsibility, you know, to go out there and look for the information yourself if you wish to, because, you know, as a human being, the doctor also has its limits, and it can be a great guide, but you can also feed him information from your search. And I think this is exactly what the e-patient movement is about, is about creating this very complementary approach between the patient and the doctor.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Audience, this is your time to ask everything you always wanted to ask about digital health, but you never dare to. Julio is thanking you for the answer. Yes, we have a question saying, asking if something similar to the diapers case could happen in Europe, or if we have different regulations already that protects our data. If you know a little bit, you don't have to get
Right.
into legal, but just to say a few words.
Right. So I've done this study comparing the regulation about health data in the US and Europe. And what turns out is that Europe has, by far, if you compare to any other country in the world, in fact, the strongest regulation when it comes to health data. And this regulation is what we call the GDPR, the Data Protection Regulation. And it pretty much requires companies to always ask for your consent before collecting data. So I don't know if what happened in the US could happen in Europe, simply because I am not sure that companies would be allowed to specifically know that you know, patient X had that particular disease and target you So I don't think that would be possible. But again, I'm not a legal expert, so I could be mistaken. But from what I know, I don't think it would be possible.
Thank you. We have Chantal from the audience that would like to ask you directly a question. Chantal, I will unmute you. Make sure that your microphone is working properly. Chantal, the floor is yours.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much. My name is Chantal Fouché. I represent ADHD Europe. My question is just about the Endeavour video. I'm quite impressed that you found it. This has been approved by the FDA. My question relates to, will the EMA be approving it or not?
I don't have any information on whether or not the EMA will approve it. I don't even know. Maybe it's been submitted. I have no information, so I don't want to say anything.
Yeah, no. I totally understand. It's just we caught wind of it, obviously, when it was released. So
Yeah.
I was just curious because obviously US and Europe is different. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Chantal. And maybe we can look it up and see if we see this information, if we can find this information somewhere. We have another question from Anastasia from Gamian Europe. It's a bit of a technical question, so let's see how far we can answer this one. And we will talk more about blockchain in the future webinars. How does the blockchain technology work in terms of allowing patients to have more control over their data and make companies, forcing companies to be more transparent?
Right. So I'm very happy about this question because blockchain is the technology that we've been building an expertise on in the company. So, phew, I can answer this technical question.
Okay, good. Go.
So the way that we present in simple words what blockchain is, it's sort of an audit trail, so like an Excel sheet that pretty much stores sensitive information. And no one can ever alter that information. It's immutable. So if you have data on an application and you want to write on the blockchain that this data can only be accessed by your healthcare providers and not by any private companies, then this blockchain will prevent any private company from entering that app and collecting your data. So this is pretty much how it works. You cannot force the company to install such a blockchain on their app for you to control the data. But if that blockchain is there and that you want to control your data, you can write this information on the blockchain and no one will ever be able to hack it or pass through this information. And this is sort of how you ensure that once you write that your data is only available to your physician, for instance, you can make sure it would only be available to your physician because you create this extra security layer with the blockchain.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think let us know if your if our answer is clear enough. If not, feel free to ask any clarification.
Yeah.
We have another question from Christopher Vella from the Malta Health Network. I think it was referring to the possibility for industry or in general healthcare or a researcher to know a little bit more about our DNA and the coding. One area which could be used against the patients is within the insurance companies industry, where there might be diagnosed without patient ever being made aware of. Is he asking again about who would have those information and potentially if those information could be used against the person?
Well, I think the risk is clear out there. I mean, we cannot be naive about these things.
Yeah.
I think we are really not aware of how sensitive our health data is and how much it is used out there without our consent. It's pretty crazy, all the health data that all these companies have about us, and we have no clue that they do. So yes, if we do this genetic test and we go through a company that reuses this data for commercial purposes or even shares with third parties that we're not aware of, our data could potentially end in the hands of an insurer. And that it's just a risk that you take. And I think that we should be aware of that before taking the decision to have our DNA sequenced or doing a microbiome test or any of that. And yes, the risk is definitely out there, and we have to be aware of it.
Thank you. We have a question from Daniela Papirizi. When you speak about digital twin in the future, how far in the future you're talking about? It's a funny question.
Well, right now we can create digital twins of pretty much all the organs, perhaps not of the brain, but I've seen digital twins of the heart, of the kidney, of the lungs, of a lot of different organs. What is very complicated is that when you put all these things together, it's not just the way that the organ works mechanically. You can also have to consider, the biochemistry of the person and the nervous system of the person. And this is something that's way more complicated to measure. We can, measure it through blood test, but have a real live representation of what the biochemistry of an individual might look like. I'm not sure this is, around the corner. So I cannot tell you in terms of years, but I think it will take a while before we figure that out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sorry, I'm trying to follow up with all the questions now. People were shy, but now they're really. Yes, there is a question from Gergely, who is asking if you can tell us a little bit about artificial intelligence.
Yes. So the reason I didn't talk about artificial intelligence is because it would be, a whole afternoon. And I thought you would have enough of me after 30 minutes, so I wouldn't keep you the whole afternoon. But I can give you a very quick overview of what we can use artificial intelligence for in healthcare. So if you think about healthcare and the patient's journey, you think about, a patient feeling sick, then contacting a primary care doctor, eventually going to a specialist and hospital, and then to complementary exams and prescriptions, and then going back home. At each one of these steps, you can improve the the outcomes based on data that you can collect that will help you predict how the patient will react. For instance, the digital therapeutic that I was showing you that does this survey for patients at home, they use an artificial intelligence, or more precisely a machine learning algorithm that would analyze the data, and then if the data points to a higher risk for the patient, they will alert the doctor. The same way, when a patient comes in for a medical checkup, your doctor can look at data, and an artificial intelligence can say, well, based on all the data that we have on this patient is at risk of developing such and such disease. If you do a CT scan, for instance, the artificial intelligence will look at the CT scan, compare it to all the CT scan it has ever seen before, and say, I believe that this patient has, I don't know, a tumor at that particular point that the doctor may have missed. So you can I can basically carry on and carry on and carry on about artificial intelligence. What you need to understand is that anytime there is a lot of data, and that this data can help you predict an outcome, then this is where artificial intelligence can come in to make sure that that outcome that you predict is backed by all this data and by all this knowledge, and is more precise than if a human were to predict it.
Yeah, thank you very much. There is another question regarding blockchain and the protection of data. Is asked from Merete about blockchain. If an organization have its own server and own all the data and do not share unless within specific surveys, would the data still be at risk And is it still possible, needed to use blockchain? I think there is a little bit between how to protect the data of probably, I'm guessing, Merete, your members, the patients you're working with, and if there is a need to use blockchain for that. So I think there's a little bit of two different questions in the same one, but if you can provide us with them.
So blockchain is something that adds on top of the database to sort of control the access to the data. Now, that being said, if your database that's underlying that blockchain is not secured, it can always be hacked and the data can always be leaked. No matter what type of blockchain you use and how you use it, there's always going to be a cybersecurity risk on your database. So blockchain can only help you in, giving you visibility over who uses the data, how it's being used, and make sure that no party that is not allowed to see the data will see it. But more than that, it doesn't do. So it won't protect the data that you have in your database if it's ever hacked and it's leaked.
Yeah. I think this also answered a little bit the question we had from Marjana, that is asking, say that obviously digital devices collect an enormous amount of information and data that are stored on devices, but also servers of manufacturers and other third providers, and how patients can protect those data, and to be sure that the information only goes to the people that they authorize to see those data. And also I would add, if it's really the role of patients, or patients should advocate for that and other people acting on. I think where do you see a bit the difference between the role of patients and the role, for example, of doctors or companies or anyone that not owns but manage those big amount of data?
Right. Well, I do believe that it's a shared responsibility, because from the second that you yourself expose yourself on the internet and share sensitive data, I feel like it's hard to complain that someone took and used your data when you yourself put it out there. However, I do understand that in some scenarios, the risk of your data being leaked is not as important as the benefit that you get from sharing the data, especially if it's, for instance, in a patient community, you want to talk to the other patient, you want to get information about your disease, then you don't really, you're not really sensitive to the fact that your data might be hacked or leaked or stolen or whatever. So it's really a mixed responsibility where you have to be aware of the risk, but then you're not the one that should prevent the risk from happening. I mean, patients are not cybersecurity experts. This is something that either the companies providing the service should do, or the regulators to control the way that these companies use your data as a secondary use. So it's really a shared responsibility between the companies providing the service, the patient that uses the service in exchange of its data, and then the regulators that create sort of the framework in which this data is shared and used.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. We have another question from the floor from, again, Chantal, which Chantal, I will give you the floor once again. So you're unmuted now, Chantal.
Thank you. I really liked the phrase and the question that got me thinking about how would it work when other this is my language, how other body parts would be used with artificial intelligence. So I'm just curious to know about the brain. How I mean, you did say you could talk a whole day on artificial intelligence, but I'm really interested in the brain. If you could give us some information about digital twins with regards to the brain. Thanks.
Well, I think this is one of the trickiest things when it comes to digital twins, is that physicians don't even understand the brain as it is in a human skull. So creating a digital twin of it is just, I believe, not possible for the moment, because you first need to understand perfectly well how the brain structure works, and then know how it works for every specific patient to create precise digital twins that are a match for the patient's brain. So as long as we don't understand exactly how all the neural connections work in the brain and what the structure of the brain work is, and more than just the structure, what each area of the brain and each stimulation of the neural system creates as a response, I'm not really sure how we can create a digital twin of the brain. And I think that this is perhaps one of, I think that we won't see this coming in the next couple of years. It's something.
Yeah, well, it's a very high grade question, but that's obviously the body part I think about. So thank you.
Right. Yeah, of course. I think that if we tackle this one, then we do have a major win. But yeah, it's still years away.
Yeah. Well, there's a brain gut connection, and I believe there's a heart connection. So, we'll see how digital does everything. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we are heading towards the end of the webinar. I hope we answered at least most of your questions. This is, as I said, sorry, I'm still reading a few questions to see. All right, no, they're just thank you messages. So this is the first webinar of our webinar series that will have other other 4 webinars. This is the first one. And as you know, EPF is also very active on digital health in general. We just created a briefing on data and artificial intelligence. That includes a glance at all the new the novelties at European level. And also, we recently answered to a consultation on data strategy and EA white paper. All those information are available on our website. We will also add them to the follow-up email you will receive on Monday with the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint presentation for your. Unfortunately, PowerPoint presentation will be in PDFs. You won't be able to access the videos, but you will have all the other informations. So as I say, EPF is really active on this topic, and we really would like to take this opportunity for you to during those other 4 webinars to really ask any question you might have on this very big and now even hot topic, I would define it. So before thanking Anka for her time and her very clear way of explaining things in a very simple way, although I'm sure they're not simple at all, I would like to inform you, and obviously you will receive an official invitation, but the next webinar will be on the 9th of July, at 3:30 Central European Summer Time. And we will have a speaker from EMA, which will talk about EMA strategy on data, including the TEL principle that they recently published, and how the agency is integrating big data in its assessment and how they're seeing the implication for the future of pharmaceutical regulation. And we will try to touch also a little bit on the role of patients and patients' organization in this dimension. So you can already pencil this in your diary if you would like to join the next webinar, and if not, no worries, we will send you more information in due time. Anka, a big thank you for your time, your commitment, and your energy on a Friday afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
It was really a pleasure, and I really hope we will collaborate in the future. And if we haven't answered to any of your questions, please feel free to write us at info@eupatient.org to get more information. Once again, thank you everyone for your kind participation. We were quite a numerous number of people, and I wish you all a lovely weekend. Thank you.